Imagine being released into an unknown, forced world to hide your identity and suddenly realize that the fate of an entire people depends on you. It sounds like a big epic scene, but that was the reality of Esther, a young Jewish young woman who left anonymity to become queen of the most powerful empire of the time. However, Esther's true story goes far beyond what many know. If you think your life has already had twists, wait until you know the details of this fascinating narrative. Esther's book is one of the most intriguing texts in the Bible, an account where God is not mentioned directly, but his providence manifests himself in every detail. Amid conspiracies, death decrees and bold strategies, Esther found himself in the face of the most difficult choice of his life: risk everything or remain silent. But what does this story have to do with you? Much more than imagine. Esther teaches us about faith, courage and female leadership in times of crisis. Your steps reveal how a simple act of boldness can change destinations. And today you will find out surprising secrets about this extraordinary woman and how your legacy can impact your journey. Esther's book is one of the most intriguing in the Bible, and for a curious reason he is the only one, along with Solomon's singing, who does not mention God directly. But that doesn't mean he was absent. Quite the contrary. Each event, each turnaround and every choice made by Esther and Mordecai reveal the divine providence acting behind the scenes. This book transports us to the Persian Empire, where Jews lived after the Babylonian exile, trying to maintain their faith and identity in a foreign culture. At that time, being Jewish meant living at a constant risk. They were far from their homeland, scattered among other peoples and subject to the whims of the Persian kings. But what seemed only a historical account becomes a true manual on faith, courage and strategy. Esther was not born queen, nor did she expect this destination. However, his trajectory shows that God's plans often go far beyond what we can imagine. This story also teaches us something essential: even when God seems silent, he is acting. Every detail of the book reveals that nothing happens by chance. Coincidences? None. Everything was being carefully aligned for a larger plan to be fulfilled. Esther and Mordecai had no idea how their lives would change, but trusted in the divine purpose. And this lesson remains alive to this day. After all, how many times do we feel lost, not knowing if there is a plan for us? Esther's book gives us a powerful answer. Esther did not start his life surrounded by luxury and privileges. On the contrary, its story had a difficult beginning. Orphaned since he was a child, he was raised by his cousin Mordecai, who assumed the role of father. Imagine the challenge of growing up without parents and still living as a foreigner in the Persian Empire, where Jews were seen as a separate people. However, what seemed like a simple destination changed radically when King Ahasuerus I decided to replace Queen Vashti. For that, he ordered the most beautiful young people to be taken to the royal harem, and Esther was among them. Being chosen for this selection was not exactly a fairy tale. Although it may seem glamorous, in practice, it meant leaving everything behind and living under the rules of the palace without guarantees of a future. However, something unexpected happened. Esther found grace before the king. Unlike other young women, she did not seek to impress him with rich or vanity, but won her heart simply and wisdom. Quickly, she kicked her as a new queen without even knowing that she was Jewish. Here we learn something powerful: fate can lead us to unimaginable places, but it is our attitudes that define what we will do with opportunities. Esther was not the strongest, the richest, or the most experienced, but he had something essential: purpose and character. How many times do we look at the circumstances and think we are not good enough? However, just like Esther, we can be elevated to unexpected positions when we understand that there is something bigger at stake. Not everything was peace in the Persian Empire. Among the king's tall officials there was a man named Haman, who had a position of great influence and an even larger ego. He required everyone's reverence, but Mordecai, Esther's cousin, refused to bow before him. This simple act of faithfulness to Jewish faith aroused in Haman a deadly hatred. For him, it was not enough to punish Mordecai; he wanted to exterminate all the Jewish people. With his privileged position, he convinced King Ahasuerus to sign a royal decree determining the death of all Jews scattered throughout the kingdom. Imagine the impact of this decision: an entire people sentenced to death simply by their identity. Haman's decree seemed unquestionable, as the Persian laws could not be revoked. Jews, who were already living as foreigners, were now facing an extermination threat. Fear and despair took over the community. But in the midst of the imminent tragedy, Mordecai saw one hope: Esther, the Jewish queen that no one knew was Jewish. He understood that his presence in the palace was no coincidence and challenged it. Who knows if it wasn't for a moment that you came to royalty? This moment teaches us that challenges are often disguised opportunities. How many times we see each other in the face of gigantic problems and ask ourselves, why do I? And if the right question is, why not me? Esther was placed in a unique position, but needed to decide between the comfort of the palace or the risk of intercede for his people. The true test of courage was just starting. Faced with the death decree, Esther faced a distressing dilemma. She could remain silent and protect herself, or risk intercede for her people even though she knew that appearing before the king without being called it could cost her life. In Persian culture, no one, not even the queen, could present herself to the king without permission. But Mordecai challenged her with a powerful truth. Perhaps God had put her there for this moment. With faith and courage, Esther made her decision. Before acting, he summoned all Jews for 3 days of fasting and prayer, preparing spiritually for the most dangerous mission of his life. Esther knew he needed to be strategic. Instead of going directly to the point, he invited King Ahasuerus and Haman to a banquet. During dinner, she revealed nothing but invited them to a second banquet the next day. This extra time was essential for everything to align. That same night, the restless king discovered that Mordecai had saved his life a long time ago and had never been rewarded. Meanwhile, Haman planned Mordecai's death, not imagining that his own ruin was near. The queen did not act impulsively. She waited for the right moment. In the second banquet, Esther finally revealed the truth. She was Jewish and her people were sentenced by a decree signed by the king at Haman's request. Ahasuerus was furious to realize that he had been manipulated and understood that his own queen was among the victims of the evil plan. The turnaround was about to happen. Here we learn something crucial. Courage does not mean acting without fear, but acting despite it. Esther trusted God, used wisdom and stepped ahead at the right time. Haman's plan seemed perfect, but he didn't have divine providence operating behind the scenes. As soon as Esther revealed her identity and denounced her plot to King Ahasuerus, the tide became dramatically. The king was furious to realize that he had been manipulated to sign a royal decree that put his own queen at risk. Ahasuerus left the hall enraged and Haman, desperate, tried to beg mercy to Esther. But fate reserved for him a tragic end in an ironic blow. The king ordered Haman to be executed in the same force he had prepared for Mordecai. With the fall of Haman, the danger to the Jews was not over yet. Persian laws could not simply be annulled, so Esther and Mordecai needed a new strategy. The king, convinced of the injustice committed, authorized Mordecai to write a new royal decree allowing the Jews to defend themselves from enemy attacks. This was the point of turning what was once a death sentence became an opportunity for victory. The Jewish, strengthened and united, resisted bravely and defeated their enemies in an impressive twist. This part of history teaches us that even when everything seems lost, God can turn disgrace into deliverance. Esther not only saved her own life, but guaranteed the survival of all her people. How many times do we feel we are trapped with no way out? Esther's story proves that even at the darker moments there is hope. Victory can come from where we least expect it, and what has been planned for evil can be reversed to a greater purpose. The great victory of the Jews was not forgotten. To mark this historical deliverance, Mordecai instituted the Purim feast, which is celebrated to this day by the Jewish people. During this celebration, people remember how Esther risked everything to save his people and how divine providence reversed the evil decree of Haman. The name Purim comes from the swords released by Haman to choose the day of the destruction of the Jews. Ironically, the date of mourning became a holiday of joy and gratitude. In Jewish tradition, Purim is not just a day of celebration but generosity. Jews exchange gifts, help the needy and publicly read Esther's book, celebrating God's faithfulness, even when he seems silent. The most amazing of this story is that its principles are still applicable today. In a world full of challenges, Esther teaches us that female faith, courage and leadership can transform destinations. Its story echoes to the present day, reminding us that an act of boldness can change everything. Looking at Esther's trajectory, there is a question in the air: what if she had remained silent? Perhaps its people had been exterminated. Your life proves that each person has an essential role in the divine plan. Perhaps you are going through moments of uncertainty without understanding your purpose. But Purim's story reminds us that even the challenges are part of something bigger. Who knows if you haven't been placed exactly where you are for a while? Esther's trajectory is not just a biblical account, it is a life manual. She teaches us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Just like her, we often see ourselves in the face of challenges that seem insurmountable. But have we ever stopped to think that we are exactly where we should be? Perhaps that obstacle in your life is actually a disguised opportunity. If Esther had chosen the silence, her people would have been destroyed. And you? In which areas of your life do you need to position yourself? Whether in your faith, in your dreams, or even in personal challenges, the lesson that remains is clear: if God has put you in a place, He has a purpose for you there. The question is, are you willing to act? If this story has inspired you, imagine how many other biblical lessons can transform your life. Subscribe to the channel, enable notifications, and follow more content about spirituality, prosperity, and personal growth in the light of the Word. After all, knowledge only makes sense when shared.